This last year, I took a class on diversity and social justice. I gained insights from this class that I share with everyone I talk to. This process has motivated discussions in my family on topics that we never talk about, and given me opportunity to challenge assumptions by referencing arguments that have been profoundly considered by scholars. My awareness of my own responsibility has been raised. I have realized that as a Christian with many privileges, I am morally obligated to give myself to the hungry and satisfy the desire of the afflicted, as it says in Isaiah 58. This is more than a calling to understanding. This is a call to take action, one that I have recognized that I really struggle to carry out. I grew up in a majority white community where I was fostered in what Chimamanda Adichie would call a single story. Adichie states that it is important not to judge a place or person based on a single story. She says that we need to hear from many perspectives before we draw a conclusion about a situation or a people. In Kansas, we had a single story about how racism worked in America. The story that I was raised with was that yes, racism was a horrible thing, but it had generally been eradicated from the U.S., and those who made a huge fuss about it were being unreasonable. I had one black friend, Maya. She was the only black girl in our small private high school. Sometimes someone at a ball game would throw some racial slur at her, and all of her white friends would gather around her to comfort her. As I stood by and added my voice to those of my friends in condemning such behavior, I always felt that I was not racist because I would never say such things to her. This tendency to vindicate myself through her experience was not an effort to be a good white person, as Audrey Thompson notes that many white people do, because my identity as a white person was not truly contested. I was not friends with Maya because she was black, and neither would I have thought less of myself if I had not known her. Rather, it reflected my simplistic understanding of racism and of my friend's lived experience, an ignorance of her need to constantly hide some part of herself in order to fit into our dominant white culture, a kind of double consciousness that W.E.B. Du Bois describes. Later, I met Maya as a college student and observed her embracing her black identity. I realized how little I really understood her in high school. Generally, white people don't know they are privileged. As Harlan Dalton notes, white people typically live with an unmarked status that causes them to barely even notice their race, while people of color are continuously being reminded. That was true for me, even after I gained insight from my friend. A freshman at Wheaton College, I remember being challenged in a chapel on diversity and really wanting to resist the idea that there was a problem. However, something that the speaker, a black student, said really struck me. She said that even black people who wanted to fit in were labeled Oreos by their home community for doing so. I started to realize what a lose-lose situation U.S. culture places people of color in. I came to realize that our system says, change and be white like us, and we will give you success, or stay in your ghetto. I started to notice how inescapable the situation was for people of color, but it was escapable for me. I was a white girl standing on the sidelines, observing a battle that I was not part of, one that I could walk away from and forget for long periods of time, something that people of color do not have the luxury of doing. About 10 years ago, in an effort to get outside of my cultural bubble, I moved overseas and became my own kind of minority, the only white girl in my small town. Although I now live with other white people, I'm still a minority in my context, and I experience many of the situations that people of color describe in the U.S. I am stared at by strangers on the street and followed in stores. I am often put on display as a token white person and asked to be the expert on my race. And I am compelled to adapt to systems and cultures that are different from my home culture. Living overseas has made me realize my own peculiarity, an awareness that Richard Dyer argues most white people do not have. Yet lest it be perceived that I claim to have lost my ignorance, I am fully aware that I can never really understand what it means to be a person of color. In stark contrast to the experience of people of color, my minority status is privileged. In the spirit of Peggy McIntosh, let me acknowledge my privileges. Because I am white, I am assumed to be a rich and valuable social alliance. I am considered to be an authority on English and also on a dominant Western culture. And I am more likely to conform to international standards of beauty. Perhaps because Hollywood has such a far reach, or perhaps because of much deeper and more historical reasons, I have often been complimented and even admired for the color of my skin. In his book, Between the World and Me, Ta-Nehisi Coates notes, by contrast, that the black body is often devalued, and I know it's true in China. I still remember the hurt and disappointment of a black colleague who could not find skin lotion that did not have a whitening agent at the store. Why is it so important to be white? The message that Chinese receive has been ground so deep that somehow they just all instinctively know that it is. I also have the option to engage in social justice or stand on the sidelines. At my university, I am part of a hiring team. Recently, we had a meeting to discuss applicants for the coming year. One of our leaders, a white male Christian, argued that we should reject an applicant from Africa for the primary school because Chinese parents were highly racist and would object to having a black man teach their children. I was troubled by this argument, but I didn't say anything right away because I knew that what he said was most likely true. And that it was then there was the matter of avoiding conflict and protecting our place of influence. A few years back, my sister worked in the same administrative office, which regularly supplies extracurricular jobs for the faculty. When the request came through for only white foreign teachers for a job opportunity, she fought for the rights of the black teachers in our community. Nothing seemed to change except for that my sister was not asked to continue in her position after that semester. It's hard to know when to stand up and how to try to change a system, and so easy to step back and let things continue as they always have. However, at our next meeting, I appealed to our leader, and he agreed quite easily to pass the resume along. We all knew it most likely wouldn't be accepted by the administrator at the primary school, but it was a small thing that we could do. These are the kind of pragmatic justifications that maintain racist systems, not only in the U.S., but all over the world. Eduardo Bonilla Sevilla, in his book, Racism Without Racists, describes how racism has become less overt in the U.S. than it used to be, perhaps even invisible to most people, the same people who allow it to happen through passivity or by making pragmatic choices not to cause trouble. Many people think, I can't change anything anyway. It is better for someone sympathetic like me to stay in this position rather than if I take a stand and am removed. Yet sympathetic people still make choices that accommodate racist and deprive people of color of opportunities and rights. As Derek Bell, the father of critical race theory, states, the interests of blacks in achieving racial equality will be accommodated only when it converges with the interests of whites. Sadly, in most cases, this convergence does not happen, not even among Christian people making hiring decisions in a Chinese community. Is there a solution to this state of affairs? Ta-Nehisi Coates and Derek Bell don't believe there is, and I'm inclined to agree with them, not as long as we identify people as the primary source of the problem and the primary source of the solution. I agree with McNeil and Richardson that the source of our problem is spiritual. God is the one who will bring healing if we learn to value and forgive each other. Racism against people of color is only one kind of oppression that exists in the world. Some people even create oppression as they experience it due to the intersectionality of our identities, as Derek Bell describes in the critical race theory. For example, a white woman like myself might experience oppression as a woman and create oppression by being white. If we villainize one kind of person, we create blindness to the war that may be going on in that person's heart. We must remember what Paul told another group of oppressed people during the first century. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the powers, against the world forces of darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places. In their book, The Heart of Racial Justice, McNeil and Richardson argue for the need to recognize these forces as we struggle against the racist systems and beliefs. God loves people, and it is his kindness that brings us to repentance. We need to look to God for our own identity, for our strength, and for our compassion. As we align our interests with his, the interests of black and white people will also converge, because God says to his people, "Is this not the fast which I choose, to loosen the bonds of wickedness, to undo the bands of the yoke, and to let the oppressed go free and break every yoke?" When we are truly seeking him, that will be our heart also. This diversity class has shown me that my values are idealistic. I want everyone to be able to share their views in an unprejudiced environment. God is not threatened by ideas. This personality trait makes me the eternal devil's advocate, and it gets me into trouble. The literature I read expanded my thinking on the experience of communities of color and in the United States, and confirmed my lifelong commitment to greater inclusiveness. Beyond a single story, not just mine or the people in our class, but the stories of the world. I crave the broadest of worldviews, a value which has motivated me to live overseas and seek out diverse perspectives. In this class, I've also learned a little bit of what it means to have my ideas rejected because of who I am, an experience which is relatively unusual for a white person. This experience has raised my awareness of the forces that work to silence people, an awareness that I bring with me into my own classroom. Although my influence is limited and filtered by my identity, I have chosen to actively work to overcome these forces that interfere with or hinder my students' expression of their diverse perspectives and experiences.